What would you do if the woman you trusted most, the mother of your children, betrayed you with someone you worked beside every single day? This is not just a story of infidelity. It's a story of strategy, revenge, and ultimate justice in court. And believe me, you don't want to miss the shocking twist waiting at the end. Welcome back to Cheating Stories 7. If you enjoy these dramatic real-life stories, make sure to like, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments. Now, let's dive straight into today's story. I recorded my wife cheating with my co-worker and destroyed her in court. Noah Reyes never expected his future to begin beside a lemonade stand. In the summer of 2014, he was just another exhausted man, drifting through the mall's bright corridors, chasing the smell of fried chicken before heading back to his second shift. The line at his usual spot curled halfway around the food court, so he diverted, annoyed, into the shorter line by a glowing cooler of lemonade. That detour, so small at the time, became the first domino in a chain he still replays in his mind. She was there, leaning against the counter in a red sundress, her hair pinned back as if she wanted her face to be impossible to ignore. Isabel Morneau, though he wouldn't know her name until later, turned when his shadow crossed hers. Her smile cracked the noise of the mall in half. When she laughed at his clumsy joke about needing lemon instead of luck, it didn't feel polite. It felt like recognition. He bought her the lemonade she claimed to be waiting for, though she admitted her cousin worked in the back and she hadn't been in line at all. They talked as though the air had been saving words just for them. She wrote her number in neat loops on the back of her receipt. By the time her cousin appeared, Noah already knew he would call before the ink dried. What followed was a rush of firsts. Midnight drives that stretched until dawn. Playlists traded like confessions. The discovery of how her voice rose when she spoke about design. 3 years later, beneath market bulbs strung in a borrowed courtyard, he slipped a ring onto her finger. She said yes with the certainty of someone choosing gravity itself. Marriage did not roar. It settled. They signed mortgage papers, filled a hallway with photos Isabel aligned by quarter inches, and raised a plant Noah had bought on impulse, a plant that refused to die even after weeks of neglect. They built a home of rituals, takeout Fridays, soccer Saturdays, whispered debates over which wall needed repainting. By 2017, they had 3 children and a rhythm that, from the outside, looked enviable. Noah worked maintenance at a distribution center, solving problems like scratching an itch until it disappeared. Isabel joined her sister in staging homes and short-term rentals, turning blank rooms into places buyers could imagine loving. Together, they looked like proof that ordinary could be extraordinary, but inside the proof lived fractures. Isabel's phone began to rest face down on the dinner table. Laughter slipped from the porch late at night, tethered to someone Noah wasn't invited to know. He told himself it was nothing: work stress, family chaos, normal drift. He repeated the mantra until he almost believed it. Then came the squeal of brake pads on his car, the reason Isabel started picking him up from work. At first, he enjoyed the sight of her pulling into the lot, sunlight spilling across her windshield. The novelty felt like high school again, but novelty metastasized. Bree, the front office clerk with a sharp smile, greeted Isabel as if she'd been waiting. Darren Cole from shipping drifted close with jokes that weren't funny but earned Isabel's laughter anyway. Noah brushed it off. Charm is not a crime, he told himself. Attention is not a verdict, yet the pattern thickened. Isabel's visits multiplied, outnumbering their date nights. She and Bree shared in jokes he never understood. Darren's name crept into stories disguised as anecdotes about someone else. One evening, watering the stubborn kitchen plant, Noah noticed water spilling too fast over the saucer. He froze at the sight, as if the plant were trying to tell him something, that care can drown as easily as neglect, that too much of the wrong thing still ends the same way. He wiped the counter slowly, the rag heavy in his hand, and wondered what else he was pretending not to see. The warehouse had its own weather. The air was thick with the hum of forklifts moving like restless insects, their beeping ricocheting against concrete walls. Metal doors groaned, pallets slammed, and somewhere in the background a portable speaker fought the noise with bass lines too heavy for its plastic frame. Lunch breaks were no quieter. Gossip piled up higher than the stacks of boxes, every rumor balanced carefully on the next. Noah had learned to tune it out, preferring the honest racket of machinery to the whispers of people who treated other lives like free entertainment. That balance shifted the day Isabel appeared. She was supposed to be there only by accident, picking him up because his brakes had failed. But even accidents can open doors. Bree Nolan, the front office clerk who always seemed 2 beats too eager, greeted Isabel like a long-lost cousin. She poured coffee from the office pot, tilted her head with admiration, and asked about pendant lights as if design talk could double as an audition. And then there was Darren, from shipping, tall enough to loom without trying, built like someone who enjoyed the way t-shirts stretched across his shoulders. He appeared the way a moth appears when a light is turned on, sudden, inevitable, distracting. Every time Isabel came, Darren materialized too, armed with a joke. Most weren't funny, but he delivered them with such confidence that Isabel's laughter spilled out anyway, filling the spaces where Noah's voice used to live. Darren shook hands with 2 squeezes instead of one, as if trying to prove something wordless. He learned names too quickly, repeated them like currency, and carried himself as though every introduction were a conquest. Isabel, warm by nature, drew strangers into her orbit the way others folded laundry, effortlessly, almost absent-mindedly. Noah had once admired that about her. Now it unsettled him. He told himself it was harmless. Bree bonding with Isabel over design trends was nothing but camaraderie. Darren's hovering was just coincidence. He clung to those rationalizations, but his eyes kept recording a different truth. The choreography became hard to ignore. Darren leaning against a door frame that used to be invisible. Bree splitting her smile between them. Isabel standing at the threshold as if testing the line between inside and out. His co-workers noticed. They teased, not cruelly, but in the way men test the elasticity of another man's pride. "You're lucky, Rays," one said. "She's out of your league." Another whistled low, not at Noah but at Isabel, laughing too close to Bree. Compliments about his wife used to feel like admiration. Lately they carried a weight he couldn't name. At dinner, Isabel told a story about a vending machine that ate her dollar. She laughed so hard she forgot to mention Noah had been standing beside her. Her laughter lit up the room, but for Noah it only drew sharper shadows. He chewed slowly, nodding, letting her joy carry the meal. It was nothing, he repeated, just small details stacking up like boxes on the dock, but the nothings multiplied. Isabel stopped by on days she wasn't working, waving breezily at Bree through the glass, lingering long enough for Darren to notice. Her car stayed in the lot even after Noah's shift ended, as if time bent differently for her. Bree sent her memes Noah didn't understand, and Isabel laughed at them like secret codes. Darren's name became a background hum, persistent, impossible to ignore. Suspicion didn't crash in like a siren. It ticked like a metronome, steady, unavoidable, demanding attention. Noah promised himself he wouldn't become a cliché. He wasn't going to interrogate every smile or turn into the jealous husband in a cheap drama. But in the silence after dinner, when the kids were upstairs and the house was too still, he made another promise. He would listen harder than he ever had before. The call came on a Wednesday evening, just as the house was sliding into its nightly rhythm. Dinner plates rinsed, the kids arguing over toothbrushes upstairs, the quiet settling in. Noah was standing at the sink, his hands in warm water, when his phone buzzed with an unfamiliar number. He almost let it go to voicemail, but something about the timing pressed him to swipe green. "Noah," the voice said, low, cautious. It took him a moment to recognize it, Ty Tatum, a former floor lead who had slipped out of the warehouse months ago without fanfare. A competent man, steady, not the kind of person who wasted words. Hearing him now, Noah felt the kitchen shrink. Ty didn't bother with small talk. He asked if Isabel still came around the warehouse. The question alone was enough to darken the room. Then another, did Darren still happen to be nearby whenever she did? Yes, Noah answered, slower than he meant to, as though the single word could give away something he wasn't ready to face. On the other end, Ty sighed, a sound heavy enough to cross the miles between them. He admitted he hated being the one to stir trouble, but silence was starting to feel like complicity. He described a Saturday overtime shift months ago, the warehouse unusually quiet, the trucker lounge door propped open, a Spanish pop song playing too loud for company rules. He said he walked by once, then doubled back when the laughter sounded staged. He didn't spell out the details, but the implication was clear. The scene inside didn't belong in a workplace. Darren had been there, standing like a curtain between Isabel and the hallway. Ty listed details that felt like fingerprints: the ponytail Isabel always wore, the tattoo on her arm just visible under her sleeve, the way Darren's voice dipped low, meant only for secrecy. "I should have said something sooner," Ty admitted. "But you know how it is. Nobody wants to get labeled a hater. I told myself maybe it was nothing, but the more I think about it, the less right it feels." Noah's grip on the counter turned his knuckles white. Anger and humiliation argued for the same place in his chest. He forced his voice steady, thanked Ty for calling, and hung up before he betrayed the chaos boiling inside him. When Isabel came home later, humming as she set her purse down, Noah tried honesty. He asked directly if Darren had been around when she visited the warehouse. Her reaction was sharp, immediate. She laughed, called it ridiculous, insisted she only ever saw Bree. Then she flipped the question back on him, accusing his tone of sounding like distrust instead of love. The denial was neat, almost rehearsed, and the argument that followed felt like dialogue lifted from a fight they didn't remember starting. By the time the kids were asleep, the silence had returned, but this silence was jagged, dangerous. After midnight, Noah lay awake replaying Ty's words like surveillance footage. He zoomed in on the details: the half-open door, the staged laughter, the shadow of Darren standing too close. He tried to convince himself Ty might have misread. Maybe he exaggerated, maybe he wanted drama. But disbelief no longer felt safe. It only made him late. Dinner that night was simple: roast chicken, vegetables, and the kind of quiet that usually belonged to comfort. But Noah's chest was still heavy with Ty's warning, replaying it like static in the background. He set his fork down, steadied his breath, and decided to gamble. Noah placed his phone face up on the table, a deliberate contrast to Isabel's habit of laying her face down. He caught her eyes across the plates and said, calmly but firmly, "I'm not comfortable with how often you're at my workplace, and I'm not comfortable with how often Darren ends up in your stories, even when the story isn't about him." Isabel blinked once, then her face softened into something practiced, a smile polished, not warm. She leaned back, wiped her mouth with a napkin, and replied, "You're overthinking. Bree is my friend. Darren barely says 2 words to me. If you want me to stop visiting, just say it, instead of playing detective." The words landed with precision. He caught the subtext immediately. Jealousy was bad, but control was worse. She wasn't just denying, she was maneuvering, painting his concern as paranoia, his discomfort as an attempt to cage her. If he pushed harder, she would make him the villain in his own home. Noah refused the bait. He nodded, cut another piece of chicken, and chose silence. But silence for him was not surrender, it was strategy. From that night forward, he began to document. He noticed when she left, when she came home late. He studied her wardrobe, clothes chosen less for errands and more for being seen. He tracked the migration of her phone, how it followed her from kitchen to porch, from bathroom to bed, never out of reach for long. He caught the laughter drifting from the porch. Conversations chalked up to Bree, though Bree's name rarely surfaced aloud. At work, Noah quietly checked badge access logs, something a maintenance lead could do without raising suspicion. His stomach twisted when he saw his own ID used to open the equipment cage near the old lounge on a Saturday he hadn't worked. He compared the timestamp to a text Isabel had sent Bree that day, a single car emoji. When he brought it up at work, Darren only shrugged. "Badge reader's glitch," he said, smiling like the word itself was an inside joke. Then he added, "Relax." The tone didn't feel like advice. It felt like a command. Relax. The words settled in Noah's ears like poison. He didn't argue. He went back to his desk, screenshot the log, and emailed it to facilities. He CC'd HR, his fingers tight on the keyboard. Then he waited. Minutes became hours. Hours stretched like tests he hadn't studied for. He learned how long a single minute could last when you were waiting for someone else to confirm what you already knew. That night at dinner, Isabel steered the conversation to countertops. She swiped through samples on her phone, marble or quartz, as if nothing else existed. Noah answered with half smiles, trying to sound normal, but the room had tilted. Distrust, once named, rearranges the furniture. Even the table felt less like home and more like a stage. He finished his meal, cleared his plate, and told himself one thing. He would not accuse again. He would not let her twist his words into her narrative. Instead, he would watch. He would record. He would build a file that spoke louder than any denial. And when the time came, the truth would not need his anger. It would have proof. Paranoia has a way of making even cardboard look dangerous. When the package finally arrived, Noah didn't let it come to his house. He had it shipped to a friend's address 2 blocks away, a man who wouldn't ask questions and wouldn't know what to do with the small, nondescript box if he had opened it. Noah slipped it under his jacket like contraband, carried it into his kitchen, and set it down on the counter as though it might detonate. Inside lay a device no larger than a mint tin, black plastic, a blinking light, a thin adhesive pad on the back, a voice-activated recorder daring him to use it. For 10 minutes he just stared, as if by looking long enough he might discover whether it would save him or ruin him. That night, while Isabel scrolled her phone upstairs, Noah researched. One-party consent states, chain of custody, how long the battery would last before audio cut off, what judges tolerated, what they refused. He learned quickly that morality and emergency rarely overlapped neatly, but real life never did. The next morning, he made his move. Isabel's SUV sat crooked in the driveway, dew fogging the windshield. Noah opened the driver's door under the pretense of checking for oil change receipts. His fingers found the underside of the seat. He pressed the recorder flat against the carpet, hidden by the adhesive pad. Tiny, invisible, impossible to explain if discovered. If nothing was happening, it would record silence. If something was happening, silence was no longer his ally. But hardware wasn't enough. He pulled out a folder from the hallway cabinet, the post-nup. They had signed it after their second child, when practicality had seemed like maturity. At the time, it felt like insurance for a future they prayed would never arrive. Now the words felt heavy. The infidelity clause was narrow but unmistakable. The custody terms spoke in clinical language about stability, about primary decision-making. Noah closed the folder gently, like shutting a door he wasn't ready to walk through. At work, HR finally acknowledged the badge anomaly he'd reported. They opened an audit, quiet but real. Darren brushed it off with his trademark grin, insisting the system had glitched. But the investigation meant his shrug no longer carried weight. Even in the cafeteria, the gossip had shifted. No longer admiration, speculation. Noah stayed silent. Then Bree inserted herself again. What had once seemed like comic relief now felt insidious. She invited Isabel on an inspo run to a luxury listing in the suburbs, just the two of them after hours. Noah kept his face neutral, pretending he hadn't heard. But he logged the time, logged the words, another data point. That evening, Isabel tapped her Maps app at the kitchen table, tracing a route with the same concentration she used to give design boards. Noah watched her, a quiet ache forming in his chest. When had their marriage started needing navigation just to explain where she was going? When had they stopped being each other's destination? He didn't ask. He didn't argue. He chose preparation over performance. Arguments could be twisted into stories. Evidence could not. If this fragile world was going to explode, he wanted to be the one holding proof, not just feelings. The excuse was wholesome, almost sweet. Isabel told Noah she was taking the kids to a Pixar matinee with their cousins. A Saturday afternoon filled with popcorn, laughter, and animated heroes, exactly the kind of routine Noah wanted to believe in. He kissed the kids goodbye, grateful for the fragile illusion that their family still had untouched routines. 2 hours later, his phone rang. It was his nephew, buzzing with excitement, asking if he could come over after the movie. "When Aunt Izzy picks us up," he said casually, as if the words meant nothing. But they bent everything. Pick us up, not watch with us. Noah's pulse quickened. Isabel wasn't sitting in a dark theater with their children. She had dropped them off, which meant she was somewhere else. He opened the overtime roster on his work app. Shipping was scheduled, Darren's department. His stomach tightened. He dialed Isabel once, then again, straight to voicemail both times. He didn't even remember grabbing his keys. The drive blurred, his hands locked on the wheel, anger rising until the steering column creaked. By the time he pulled into the warehouse lot, his entire body felt like one accelerating heartbeat. Inside, the crew was shrugging into jackets, chatter thinning when they saw him push through the double doors. Someone tried the line, "You don't belong here," but Noah ignored it. He belonged anywhere his marriage was being dismantled. The hallway smelled of dust and stale coffee. The old trucker lounge loomed ahead, a room long abandoned. Dead vending machines lined the wall. A sagging couch crouched in the corner. Noah slowed, listening. There was silence, the heavy kind that betrays occupancy. He edged closer, pressed himself against the wall, and leaned just enough to see inside. The world collapsed into 7 seconds. Darren sprawled back on the couch, shirt open, pants undone. Isabel on her knees before him, hair tied up, her face bent into a posture Noah could never unsee. Darren looked down at her like she was a prize he had collected. Noah's stomach lurched, but his hand moved with mechanical precision. He raised his phone, pressed record. The screen captured what his mind could barely process. 7 seconds of truth, 7 seconds no lawyer, no excuse, no denial could erase. Then he stepped in. "Are you kidding me?" His voice cracked like thunder. Darren jerked upright, animal surprise in his eyes. Isabel froze, then turned slowly. Her face showed no guilt, only irritation, as though she'd been interrupted in the middle of an errand. Noah's chest heaved. "How could you do this after everything?" Isabel's reply sliced through the room, each word a blade. "I don't love you like that." The sentence hung heavier than any scream, more final than a slammed door. Something inside Noah wanted to explode, to smash Darren's face, to scream until the walls shook. But another part, cold, deliberate, pulled him back. If he stayed, if he let rage take over, he might become someone unrecognizable to his own children. He pocketed the phone, turned, walked out. His legs felt like lead, but each step was a refusal to collapse. He left behind his wife, her irritation, Darren's stunned silence. He left behind the version of his life he had been trying so hard to protect. At home, drywall absorbed his fists. His knuckles split against plaster, pain blooming where love used to live. Within the hour, his brother Ricky arrived, toolbox in hand. Without asking questions, he changed the locks, working with the same calm efficiency they'd once used to fix bikes as boys. Noah sat on the stairs, bandaging his hands, watching each screw drive into the deadbolt. On his phone, the 7-second video waited. Proof undeniable, proof unbearable. He stared at the screen until it dimmed, realizing he didn't yet know how to live with what it showed. Morning carried no mercy. Noah woke with his hands throbbing from drywall and a phone heavy with evidence he hadn't yet shared. The house smelled of coffee and quiet dread. By the time Isabel came back, the sun had already burned away any hope of pretending. She breezed past the new deadbolt as if it were decoration. Her heels clicked against the hardwood with practiced indifference. She didn't look guilty. She looked inconvenienced. "You really had to do it, huh?" she said, voice sharp but steady. "Snitching to HR. Darren got escorted off the floor today." Noah froze. He hadn't even sent the video yet. The badge misuse and access logs alone had been enough to light the fuse. HR had moved faster than he expected. Isabel folded her arms, her eyes glittering with contempt more than fear. "You could have handled it like a man, fought him. Instead, you went crying to the system." Her words landed like acid. She was writing a mythology where Noah was weak, where her betrayal could be twisted into his cowardice. But Noah refused to join that script. He wouldn't duel for her honor like some pawn in Darren's story. He fought differently. He fought by documenting, by building cases that survived scrutiny, not by feeding Darren's ego with fists. "I don't fight for him," Noah said flatly. "I fight for proof." Isabel laughed, humorless, hollow. "Proof. You think your little paperwork makes you strong." The rest of the day unfolded like a minefield. Isabel demanded her version of normal, her schedule, her phone, her nights out. She twisted Noah's calm routines into a cage, painting stability as control. Noah didn't raise his voice. He didn't argue. His sentences were clean, declarative. "I will be filing. I will be seeking temporary orders. I will not be litigating in this kitchen." The children padded in, rubbing their eyes. Their oldest asked why the lock on the door looked different. Noah knelt, his voice softer than he felt. "Sometimes locks change when we need to feel safe," he told them. Not the full truth, but enough for now. When the house grew quiet again, Noah finally did what fear had delayed. He forwarded the 7-second video to his attorney. Minutes later, a reply came back. One line about chain of custody. A bullet list of next steps. Clinical. Efficient. As though heartbreak was just another case file. Noah saved the email, placed his phone face down, and stared at a blank draft of a message to Ty. His fingers typed the first words. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" Then erased them. He tried again, "Thank you for telling me at all," and erased that too. The cursor blinked, insistent, but Noah closed the app. Some conversations no longer needed words. The house hummed with low appliance noise. To Noah, it sounded like waiting for the next court date, waiting for Isabel's next maneuver, waiting for a new shape of life to reveal itself. He wasn't afraid in him. Not in the same way. Clarity had come, and it tasted like metal. The first call came from Gina. Noah's sister had always been quick with words, quicker with instincts. Her voice cracked through the line, part fury, part sorrow. She demanded details, but beneath the sharp edges was something softer, space for his grief. Noah didn't give her much, just fragments, the bare outline of betrayal. But she filled in the rest with protective anger, promising he wouldn't face this storm alone. Less than an hour later, Ricky arrived. His older brother didn't knock. He let himself in, toolbox in one hand and a grocery bag in the other. Practical kindness delivered the way only Ricky could manage. New locks, a phone charger because nobody remembers theirs when everything else is collapsing. Takeout that smelled of garlic and soy, filling the house with something stronger than despair. They didn't ask to see the video. They didn't ask for a speech. Instead, they measured doors, drilled plates into studs, tightened hinges. The silence between them wasn't empty. It was work. It was family. When Noah tried to help, Ricky nudged him toward the couch. "Not tonight. You're sleeping down here. The bed upstairs, it holds too much memory." The kids sensed it too. They hovered closer, eyes darting between adults. Their oldest looked at Noah as though asking for a map. Noah crouched to meet them, choosing words as carefully as evidence. "Sometimes," he said gently, "grown-ups need to live in different houses to make home feel safe again." It wasn't the speech he wanted to give, but it was the one they needed, and the one they would remember as the first honest day. Later that night, Christina texted, Isabel's sister. Her message was simple: "What's going on?" Ricky told him to wait, to let the lawyers handle it. But Noah didn't. The children would soon be bouncing between households, and facts traveled faster than denial. He typed carefully. He didn't attach the video, just a statement. "There's been a betrayal. Lawyers are involved." Christina's reply came instantly, disbelief first, then anger, then finally a softer line. "Can we talk tomorrow? I need to hear this from you." Noah agreed, but with one condition. The conversation is about the kids first. Everything else comes second. When his siblings finally left, the house was quieter, not just fortified by locks, but by something steadier. The knowledge that he wasn't carrying this weight alone. Noah sat at the kitchen table with a yellow legal pad. He listed expenses, custody schedules, phrases that sounded courtroom ready. He had no appetite for spectacle. Revenge wanted fire, drama, a stage. Noah wanted something else: custody, quiet, a life that no longer shook every time his phone lit up. Christina arrived the next afternoon with the careful posture of someone walking into a trial. She held her purse close, her eyes scanning the house as if measuring the distance between loyalty and betrayal. When Noah opened the door, she gave a polite nod, but her tension carried more weight than words. "I don't want to take sides," she began the moment she sat at the kitchen table. The lines sounded rehearsed, but her shifting fingers on the coffee mug betrayed her. I need to make sure the kids are okay." She didn't mean to, but by telling the truth, she chose a side anyway. According to her, the affair hadn't started at the warehouse. That was only where it grew teeth. Its roots reached further back, to a birthday party Bree had dragged Isabel to months earlier. Christina painted the scene. Music so loud the floor shook, lights dim enough to blur intentions, a dare disguised as dancing. Darren showed up that night too, coincidence that in hindsight felt rehearsed. There was flirting at first, harmless by label, dangerous by execution. A hand on a shoulder held too long, laughter that bent inward instead of outward. Bree encouraged it, teasing in ways that gave permission. After that came the apartment visits. Bree called them after-party debriefs, as if betrayal could be softened by vocabulary. Christina admitted Isabel had confided in her. Darren's rebellion felt intoxicating, she said. With him, Isabel could pretend she was someone else, the version of herself who didn't carry laundry lists, school forms, and snack schedules. "She told me he made her feel wild again," Christina whispered, ashamed even to repeat it. Noah sat still, his jaw tight, while Christina added details he wished she didn't know. A burner phone Bree recommended, registered under a false name. Excuses copied from Bree's text templates, lies polished by practice. And Isabel bragging in the same breath about Darren's attention while insisting she still had a good home. Noah's silence pressed Christina to continue. Finally, she confessed the hardest truth. She hadn't told him sooner because family loyalty had trapped her. "I thought I was protecting her," she said, eyes glassy. "But after hearing the kids on the phone last night, they sounded small, Noah. They sounded scared. I can't keep lying by staying quiet." From her purse, she pulled out her phone and slid it across the table. Screenshots filled the gallery, messages between Isabel and Bree, references to meetups. Inside jokes written in code that wasn't hard to break. Christina scrolled slowly, stopping at one text where Bree reminded Isabel to delete after. Another where Isabel wrote that Darren couldn't wait until Saturday overtime. "These won't make me popular at family dinners," Christina said bitterly. "But the kids matter more than a silent Christmas." Noah accepted the phone, forwarded the evidence to his own, and added the files to the growing folder his lawyer would one day open. He didn't thank her with ceremony, just a quiet nod. Gratitude and grief had blurred too closely together to separate. The confession didn't heal anything. It didn't stitch wounds or soften the memory of 7 seconds on a phone screen, but it redrew the map. Now the story had an origin point, a facilitator, a timeline, accomplices, receipts, enough to move a judge from maybe to likely. And for Noah, that shift meant everything. Noah's attorney didn't shake his head. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't even say he was sorry. He simply asked for artifacts. In court, outrage was theater, but artifacts were weapons, bank statements, toll road logs, app subscriptions, screenshots. These would do more damage than any dramatic speech Noah might be tempted to give. Together they spread the paperwork across the desk, a paper map of betrayal. At first the numbers looked ordinary, small transfers from Isabel's staging company to Darren's lender. 200 one month, 300 the next, easy to dismiss as business overlap. But then the rhythm appeared, the same round numbers repeated every month, a steady drumbeat, too consistent to be an accident. The attorney circled them with a red pen. "Patterns win cases," he said, "not accidents." Then came the phone records, a burner line linked to late-night calls and short bursts of text. The name on the account struck Noah like a blow, his late mother. Isabel had registered the phone under her name, maybe to avoid detection, maybe because it was the first identity that came to mind. To Noah, it felt like theft layered on theft, privacy stolen, Memory desecrated. He set the paper down carefully as though rough handling might make the wound worse. The lawyer noticed his silence. "We'll use it clinically," he assured him. "The judge doesn't need your grief, just the fact. Introduce it as evidence, not as a eulogy." Noah nodded, unable to trust his voice. Meanwhile, fallout spread through the warehouse. HR finalized Darren's termination, citing badge misuse and misconduct in restricted areas. What had once been gossip now stood on company letterhead, stamped with authority. Bree's slack threads, subpoenaed and printed, lay across the attorney's desk. What once looked like jokes now read like coordination. Covering Izzy. Delete after. Comments that seemed harmless in isolation but damning when aligned with timestamps. The trail didn't just tie Isabel to Darren. It tied Bree to the machinery of the affair. Hard to argue she was simply visiting a friend when her debit card showed up at Darren's lender, when her office logs confirmed her complicity. Noah stared at the files and felt something strange. He no longer felt like a betrayed husband clawing for answers. He felt like a project manager on a demolition crew, permits in hand, checking the last details before pushing the plunger. He had expected vindication to feel hot. A rush of adrenaline, satisfaction. Instead, it felt room temperature. Clinical, extremely useful, not catharsis, evidence, not healing, strategy. And in a courtroom, that distinction would matter more than his pain. Noah chose the cafe deliberately. It was the kind of place where the hum of espresso machines blurred every conversation, where the clatter of cups gave people permission to speak as if no one else were listening. The sight lines were clear, the acoustics messy, too loud for whispers, too public for theatrics. He arrived early, leaving the kids with Gina, and sat at a corner table with his recorder in his pocket. Not as a spy, he told himself, but as a historian. He didn't want drama, he wanted a record. When Isabel walked in, she looked almost casual, hair swept back, sunglasses perched on her head as if this were any other afternoon. She slid into the seat across from him, her eyes scanning the room before fixing on him with a practiced half-smile. "I'm not here to rehash," Noah began, steady. "We're not litigating the past in front of strangers. I want to talk about the kids, their routines, holidays, how we keep school out of this." The calm disarmed her. She leaned back, adopting the tone of someone eager to control the narrative. "Nothing is as bad as you're making it," she said. "You're just interpreting everything through jealousy." She painted her version of events in broad strokes, Bree as harmless, Darren as incidental, the warehouse visits as coincidence. But the more she talked, the more her sentences stumbled. Midway through one explanation, she corrected herself. "Well, I mean, yes, Darren was there more than once, but Bree was always around, except maybe not every time." The recorder didn't care about edits. It captured the slip. It captured the next one too, her admission that Bree had covered for her. That the Pixar outing had been a drop-off, not a matinee. That the infamous line, "I don't love you like that," wasn't heartfelt, but a grenade she had thrown to end an argument. It wasn't a cinematic confession. No tears, no collapse. It was better, an accumulation of small, plain admissions, strung together into something airtight, statements that, under cross-examination, would hold. Noah kept his face unreadable. He even bought the second round of coffee, slid it across the table, and let silence do the work. Isabel filled it, talking, polishing, contradicting herself. When the meeting ended, he stood, thanked her for agreeing to keep the kids' schedule steady that week, walked her to the door. She left with her sunglasses back on, carrying herself as though she'd scored a point in their private war. Noah walked the other way, hand in his pocket, recorder still humming with evidence. She thought she had won a narrative. He knew he had secured orders. Family court was fluorescent honesty. The overhead lights buzzed, washing everyone in the same pale color, as if guilt and grief were equal under voltage. There was no jury to sway, no audience to gasp. Just a judge with case numbers stacked like bricks and a calendar that did not care about heartbreak. Noah sat beside his attorney, hands folded on the table, the folder of evidence closed but heavy. Across from him, Isabel kept her chin high, posture rehearsed. Darren wasn't present. His absence said more than his smirk ever could. The hearing began without ceremony. Noah's attorney rose, his voice even, his movements measured. He introduced exhibits like a carpenter driving nails, one at a time, clean, steady, leaving no gaps. First came the 7-second video, authenticated with timestamps and metadata. No commentary, no embellishment, just the clip, just the truth. Isabel's counsel objected: foundation, context, invasion of privacy. The judge overruled once the chain of custody was laid brick by brick. The room didn't gasp, courtrooms rarely do, but the silence grew heavier, undeniable. Next came the HR letter about badge misuse and lounge access, followed by Darren's termination notice. What had once been gossip in the warehouse now lived on company letterhead, stamped and official. Isabel's claim to stable judgment bent under the weight. Then the financial trail. Bank statements tracing neat, repeated transfers from Isabel's staging LLC to Darren's lender. Round numbers month after month. The attorney circled them verbally, his tone flat but certain. Consistency, he said, is rarely an accident. The burner phone came next, registered under Noah's late mother's name. He kept his jaw locked, his gaze down, while the attorney presented it clinically: deception, deliberate, unmistakable. The judge scribbled notes, unflinching. Finally, the cafe audio, not a dramatic confession, something better. Isabel's own words, plain and unguarded, admitting Bree had covered, admitting the Pixar matinee was a drop-off, admitting her cruel line, "I don't love you like that," was a tactic, not truth. Her voice filled the courtroom like an uninvited witness. Again, her attorney objected, out of context, prejudicial. Again, overruled. The foundation was sound. Bree's slack exports followed. Once casual jokes, now damning coordination. Covering Izzy. Delete after. Timestamps aligned with overtime shifts. What looked like chatter now formed a trail. And then the post-nup, once hypothetical, now iron. The infidelity clause narrowed the judge's discretion. Custody language emphasized continuity, stability, things Isabel could no longer claim. The judge did not moralize. She didn't glare or sigh. She spoke of statutes, of precedent, of the best interests of the children. She spoke of safety, of consistency, of compliance. Temporary rulings landed clean, unemotional. Noah was granted primary decision-making authority. Isabel given structured visitation limited to a monitored app. Assets frozen pending final division. The orders landed on paper, black ink against white, as cold and definitive as math. The hearing ended as it began, quietly. No gavels slammed, no dramatic exits, just chairs scraping, attorneys stacking files. Noah walked out not happy, not vindicated, but steady. In his hands, copies of orders that made home feel less theoretical. Paper had replaced shouting. Facts had replaced doubt. For the first time in months, the ground beneath him felt solid, not because he had won, but because the fight was no longer about belief. It was about proof. Consequences traveled faster than apologies. Within a week of the filings, Isabel's name appeared in a public docket searchable by anyone with a browser. Most people wouldn't care, but it only took one client to confirm a rumor. The email arrived 2 days later. 3 sentences, polite but merciless. "We appreciate your work. Unfortunately, in light of recent developments, we're moving in a different direction." No signature flourish, no promise to reconnect. Just a clean cut. Other clients followed. Some sent short notices. Others simply stopped returning calls. Silence spoke louder than words. Staging was built on illusions, on trust in appearances. And a business built on appearances cannot survive when its owner's name is shredded in public. Bree's collapse followed quickly. Her employer conducted an internal review after Noah's attorney subpoenaed her Slack exports. What once looked like flippant jokes now read as coordination, lines about covering Izzy, reminders to delete after. Liability in black and white. The committee didn't deliberate long. Bree resigned before they could choose for her. The sharp laughter she once used to deflect now sounded like negligence. Darren had already been terminated, but his humiliation took a quieter form. Prospective employers called for references. The responses came stripped of adjectives. Once he had been dependable, charismatic, a team player. Now the answer was clinical, employed here from this date to that date. Absence, Darren learned, could wound worse than insult. Isabel faced her own half-life of scandal. The internet's attention was fickle, but fickleness cut both ways. Some days nobody cared. Other days her name resurfaced, pushed by a bored acquaintance or an old rival. Friends who once complimented her Instagram aesthetic drifted to safer brunch tables. Invitations stopped arriving. The curated glow of her social circle dimmed, pixel by pixel. Even Christina paid a price. By choosing the children over family secrecy, she was quietly cut out of the family group chat. No explanation, just silence. She admitted she never liked the chat anyway. But the message was clear. Isabel's shame was contagious, and anyone who exposed it would share the exile. Noah didn't gloat, he didn't post, he didn't say karma. He took the kids to Saturday soccer, to the hardware store. They picked out paint swatches, argued over snacks, built weekends that had no villains in them. At night, when the children slept, Noah organized paperwork into neat files that no longer stung to open. The folders weren't labeled with anger, just neutral words: custody, assets, evidence. Each page slid into place, proof of order after chaos. The world didn't cheer for him. It didn't crown him righteous. It simply stopped punishing him. And in the quiet relief of that neutrality, Noah found something steady. For now, that was parade enough. The settlement conference carried its own kind of fluorescent mercy. No witnesses, no gallery, no gasps of recognition, just lawyers with binders, a mediator with a clock, and two people who had once promised forever now bargaining in fragments. The post-nup framed everything. Years ago, it had felt like insurance for a future they swore would never come. Now it was blueprint and boundary, the outline of a picture they were forced to color inside. The crayons were uneven, Noah's strokes steady, Isabel's lines jagged, desperate to escape the edges. Numbers replaced accusations. Asset partitions replaced anger. Noah kept the house, not as a trophy, but because the children's posters already curled on the bedroom walls, because they slept better in those rooms and the judge cared more about that than sentiment. Isabel kept her staging tools, her laptop, the remains of a client list already fraying under the weight of gossip. She pressed for more, suggesting trades. You take this, I take that, and we call it even. Her lawyer floated proposals dressed up as compromise, but Noah read them for what they were: narratives, ways for Isabel to leave the room claiming she had won something. He declined each one, calmly, quietly. He wasn't here for her version of the story. Custody terms landed as expected. School week routines with Noah, structured weekends with Isabel. Communication limited to the monitored app, designed to keep words from becoming weapons. The asset split wasn't cruel. It was clinical. No winners, no applause, just arithmetic applied to a broken promise. Revenge, Noah realized, wasn't fire. It wasn't spectacle. It wasn't shouting "I told you so" into a void. It was building a life so steady, so ordinary, that his enemies stopped checking to see if he was burning. He didn't post updates. He didn't leak stories. He didn't crow about victory. He complied. He built. He moved forward. The judge signed the orders with the tired pen of someone who had seen every kind of heartbreak and a few that didn't have names yet. Her signature didn't crown anyone righteous. It just closed a file. When they left the room, Isabel asked if they could talk like adults, without attorneys. Noah said yes, but only about schedules. She lingered, waiting for him to snap, waiting for a cruel word, a flare of anger, something she could use to paint herself as the victim. But he didn't give it, and that, Noah realized, was the only part of this saga that belonged purely to him. Not a reaction to her lies, not a response to betrayal. A choice. His own. After the decree, life didn't bloom into fireworks. It resumed. The papers were signed, the case file closed, and the world moved on without ceremony. Noah walked out of the courthouse not lighter, not triumphant, but steady, and for him that was enough. He sold the bed, the one too heavy with memory, and kept only the lamp from their room. The lamp gave a steady light, neutral, unburdened. He fixed the leaky faucet in the kitchen, the one he had ignored for nearly a year. The drip had once been background noise. Now repairing it felt like reclaiming something, competence that wasn't followed by apology. At his desk, he wrote 4 rules on an index card and taped it inside the drawer he opened every morning. Tell the truth early. Leave before contempt grows. Choose the ordinary over the dramatic. Never abandon yourself to preserve the story. He read them each morning. Not prophecy, reminder. He scheduled a trip to see his father, who had been patient through the silence. He replanted the kitchen herb that always looked one day from dying. This time it lived. Then Ty messaged. A confession smaller but uglier than Noah expected. Bree had slipped him cash months ago, nudging him to pass along a half-truth meant to destabilize. Only later, realizing the scale of what was happening, had he flipped and told the whole truth. Ty forwarded screenshots. Noah filed them away, not because he needed them, but because keeping the record complete was how you stopped arguing with ghosts. One evening, Isabel texted, a neutral apology wrapped around a request to meet for closure. Noah stared at the screen a long time, then typed 2 sentences, one about co-parenting and one with a link to the monitored app. Nothing more. Freedom, he realized, wasn't an explosion. It was the quiet rightness of a house that held only the people who lived there. It was the absence of dread at the sound of tires on gravel. It was the way his children fell asleep faster, breathing even untroubled. And it was the way the kitchen plant refused to die, thriving now that someone remembered to water it just once. And that brings today's story. I recorded my wife cheating with my co-worker and destroyed her in court to an end. In the end, betrayal never wins. Lies crumble under the weight of proof, and justice finds its way even if it takes time. But let me ask you, what would you have done in Noah's place? Would you have chosen proof over confrontation? Share your thoughts below. I'd love to hear your perspective. And don't forget, this is Cheating Stories 7. Make sure to like, comment, and subscribe for more shocking stories of betrayal, revenge, and lessons that hit close to home. See you in the next one.